By the time the shooting stopped at Little Bighorn, George Custer and every man riding directly with him were dead. The famous paintings turned it into a heroic last stand, but reality was nothing like that. What Americans would remember as Custer's last stand was not a glorious final charge. It was a catastrophic military failure, one of the greatest defeats ever suffered by the United States Army on the plains, and one of the last major native victories in North America. Buckle up, because the real story of Custer's last stand is far more brutal than the legend ever admitted. On the morning of June 25th, George Custer believed he was about to attack another vulnerable native village. He expected the camp to scatter, just as others had before it. Instead, he was riding toward one of the largest native encampments ever assembled on the Great Plains. Thousands of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho were gathered along the Little Bighorn River, and among them were around 2,000 warriors. Custer had no idea what he was about to face. The people in the village had no idea that cavalrymen were already riding toward them either. The United States government had ordered military columns into the region to force these groups back under federal control. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, already famous for his Civil War exploits and eager for another victory, commanded the forward element of the 7th Cavalry. But Custer was working with the wrong numbers. His scouts had warned him that the encampment was enormous, and some of his own men also suspected they were facing far more people than expected. Later estimates suggested there may have been roughly 1,800 warriors present, in addition to the thousands of women, children, and elders living in the village. Custer accepted a much smaller estimate, and that was the mistake that set the disaster in motion. He believed he was about to strike a vulnerable camp that would scatter under sudden attack, just as other villages had done in previous campaigns. Instead, he was riding toward one of the most powerful concentrations of native fighters ever assembled on the plains. And that's when he made the decision that turned a dangerous situation into a catastrophe. He divided his regiment. Major Marcus Reno was ordered to attack from the south. Captain Frederick Benteen was sent to scout farther west before rejoining the main force. Custer kept roughly 210 men with him and moved toward the northern end of the village. On a map, it may have looked bold, but on the battlefield, it transformed one regiment into isolated pieces that could no longer easily support one another. Reno's attack quickly showed how badly the situation had been misjudged. His men crossed the river and advanced toward the southern edge of the village, expecting to strike a surprised enemy. Instead, warriors began appearing in growing numbers. Gunfire spread across the valley. Horses stumbled and fell. More and more riders emerged from the village and from the surrounding country. The attack began to collapse. Reno ordered a withdrawal into the timber, and then retreated again to higher ground in what became a confused and costly escape. Men became separated from their companies. Some drowned while trying to cross the river. Others were cut down before reaching the bluffs. The first assault had failed, and a large part of the regiment was now pinned down and unable to help Custer. Meanwhile, Custer continued north, unaware that his battle plan was already falling apart. Somewhere beyond the ridges, Custer finally realized how badly the battle had turned against him. He sent an urgent message asking Benteen to come quickly. That message would become one of the great controversies of the battle. Could Benteen have reached him in time? Historians still debate the question. What matters is that the regiment no longer functioned as a single army. Communication had broken down. Distances had widened, and every minute made the situation worse. It had become scattered groups moving through unfamiliar ground, while approximately 2,000 warriors reacted with extraordinary speed. The Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho were not fighting for conquest. Their families, food, horses, and homes were directly behind them. That gave them every reason to close the distance as quickly as possible. Then the battle began slipping away from Custer. Accounts from native participants and evidence from the battlefield suggest that the fighting on Custer's end of the field escalated with frightening speed. Warriors moved through broken terrain they knew well. They crossed ravines, climbed ridges, and closed the distance from multiple directions. This is where one of the biggest myths about Little Bighorn begins to fall apart. The famous image of Custer standing with his men in one final heroic circle almost certainly never happened. Archaeology suggests something far more chaotic. Small groups became separated from one another. Some tried to hold ridgelines. Others fell back into shallow ravines, hoping to buy a few more seconds. Officers struggled to keep control as the line dissolved around them. Then it became pure survival. Men fired until they had no time left to reload. Horses crashed to the ground or bolted through the smoke. Dust filled the air. Gunfire echoed across the hills. Within minutes, nobody seemed to know where the next attack would come from. Within a remarkably short time, Custer's command lost cohesion completely. The famous last stand may actually have been a series of desperate last stands. None of the men with Custer survived to tell their version of those final minutes. The battlefield that rescuers found 2 days later was horrifying. Bodies lay scattered across hillsides and ravines. Dead horses covered parts of the field. Many soldiers had been stripped of equipment and clothing. Some had been burned. Others showed evidence of scalping and other forms of mutilation. This is where history begins to blur with legend. The exact condition of every body is still debated because eyewitness accounts sometimes contradicted one another, and newspapers of the period often exaggerated details that shocked the public and encouraged demands for revenge. One thing, however, is beyond dispute. Many of the dead had been treated in ways that deeply disturbed the soldiers who found them. The plains had endured years of warfare and retaliation. Native customs of war sometimes included taking trophies from the dead, and many warriors carried memories of previous killings committed by soldiers and settlers. Reducing what happened to simple savagery ignores the brutal cycle of violence that had shaped the plains for years. One body immediately became the center of attention, and it was Custer's. His remains were found among the concentration of dead on what later became known as Last Stand Hill. Reports indicate that he suffered 2 gunshot wounds, and that his body appeared less mutilated than many of the men around him. No one knows exactly why. Some stories claimed certain warriors deliberately spared his body. Others argued that the condition of his remains became exaggerated over time. Indigenous accounts differ, and historians still separate documented observations from stories that grew larger with each retelling. Even in death, Custer was becoming a legend. Perhaps that says something important about the way nations remember defeat. America could turn him into a martyr and transform a disastrous battle into a story of heroism and sacrifice. That version of events was easier to accept than another possibility, that one of the country's most famous officers had ridden into catastrophe because he misunderstood the enemy in front of him and divided his command at precisely the wrong moment. Meanwhile, the people who actually won the battle were remembered very differently. The Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho had achieved one of the greatest native victories in American history. For a brief moment, they had stopped and destroyed a U.S. cavalry command while defending their families and their way of life. But the victory carried a terrible irony. News of Custer's death shocked the United States. Public outrage fueled a massive military response. More soldiers poured into the plains. The pressure on native communities intensified. Within about a year, most declared hostile groups had surrendered, while Sitting Bull and his followers fled to Canada. The buffalo herds that supported life on the plains were nearly destroyed within the following decade, and the world these people had fought to protect was disappearing. That is the bitter truth behind Little Bighorn. The battlefield became famous because of the man who died there. Custer's last stand was never a clean and heroic final charge. It was a rapid collapse of command, a battlefield filled with confusion, fear, and desperate fighting where an entire command vanished in the space of a single afternoon. The legend remembered a fallen officer making his last stand. In the years that followed, the men who won the battle lost the world they were trying to protect, while the man who lost it became immortal.